The village of Umuaya was still wrapped in the cool blanket of darkness when Ngozi's day began. The first cock had not yet crowed, and the moon still hung low in the sky. But for Ngozi, sleep was a luxury she could not afford. While other children in the compound slept peacefully on their mats, dreaming of play and school, Ngozi was jolted awake by the splash of ice-cold water on her face. She gasped, shivering as the water soaked her thin nightgown. Standing over her was Madam Nkechi, a towering figure of terror in the dim light of the kerosene lantern. Her face was twisted in a permanent scowl, her eyes devoid of any motherly warmth. "You lazy goat," Nkechi hissed, her voice cutting through the silence like a knife. "The sun is almost up and the compound is still dirty. Do you think food will cook itself?" Ngozi scrambled to her feet, wiping the water from her eyes. "I'm sorry, Mama," she whispered, her voice trembling. She knew better than to argue. Any sign of defiance would only earn her a slap. She rushed outside, grabbing the broom made of palm fronds. The morning air was sharp, biting at her skin as she began to sweep the large, dusty compound. The rhythm of the broom against the hard earth was the only sound she made. She swept with urgency, her little heart pounding in her chest. She had to finish sweeping, fetch water from the stream which was 2 miles away, and start the fire for breakfast before the sun fully rose. If she failed, there would be no food for her today. As she walked, she looked at the window of her mother's room, wondering why fate had been so cruel. Why did Nkechi hate her so much? She was her daughter, yet she was treated worse than a slave bought from the market. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she quickly blinked them away. Crying was a weakness, and in this house, weakness was punished. The afternoon sun in the village was merciless. It beat down on the red earth, baking the ground until it cracked. Ngozi walked slowly down the narrow path from the stream, her neck aching under the weight of the heavy clay pot filled to the brim with water. Sweat trickled down her back, soaking her torn dress. She was tired, hungry, and her legs felt like lead. But she dared not stop. Madam Nkechi was waiting for the water to cook lunch. As she stepped into the compound, her foot caught on an exposed tree root. Time seemed to slow down. Ngozi gasped as she lost her balance. She tried to steady herself, but the heavy pot was too much for her weary body. It slipped from her head and crashed onto the hard ground, shattering into 1,000 pieces. The water, precious and cool, soaked instantly into the thirsty dust. Ngozi stood frozen, staring at the broken pieces. Her heart hammered against her ribs like a trapped bird. Before she could even move, the door to the house flew open. Madam Nkechi stormed out, her eyes blazing with fury. She saw the wet ground and the broken shards of her favorite pot. "You useless child!" Nkechi screamed, grabbing a thick stick from the firewood pile. "That pot cost more than your life!" Without waiting for an explanation, Nkechi descended on the girl. The stick whistled through the air, landing on Ngozi's back and shoulders. Ngozi curled into a ball on the dust, sobbing and shielding her head. She did not beg. She knew it was useless. "Please, Mama, it was an accident," she finally cried out, the pain becoming unbearable. "You will not eat today," Nkechi spat, breathing heavily. "You will sleep outside with the goats. Maybe they will teach you how to be useful." That night, huddled near the goat shed, hungry and in pain, Ngozi looked up at the stars and touched the welts on her arms and asked the silent sky the question that haunted her. What did I do to deserve this? Hunger has a way of clearing the mind. For 2 days, Ngozi had eaten nothing but scraps of yam left over by the chickens. Her stomach ground loudly, a constant reminder of her misery. But the pain in her heart was worse than the hunger in her belly. She watched from a distance as Madam Nkechi laughed with the neighbors, acting like a saint, while Ngozi washed dirty clothes at the back of the house. The hypocrisy made her blood boil. That evening, something shifted inside Ngozi. She was 18 years old now. She looked at her hands, rough and callous from years of hard labor. She looked at her reflection in a bucket of water, gaunt cheeks and sad eyes. If I stay here, she thought, I would die. She realized that Nkechi would never change. The woman wanted to break her spirit until there was nothing left. Ngozi decided she would not let that happen. She waited until the dead of the night when the snoring from Nkechi's room was loud and rhythmic. Moving as silently as a ghost, she crept into the kitchen. She found a Ghana must-go bag and packed the few rags she called clothes. Her heart raced so fast she thought it would wake the house. She tiptoed to the clay jar where Nkechi kept the market money. Trembling, she took a handful of naira notes, just enough for transport. It wasn't stealing, she told herself. It was payment for years of unpaid slavery. She unlatched the back gate, the rusty hinges groaning slightly. She froze, waiting for a shout, but none came. She stepped out onto the dirt road, the moonlight illuminating her path. She did not look back at the house that had been her prison. Fear gripped her throat, but the hope of freedom pushed her forward. She was leaving, and she would never return. The village motor park was a chaotic place, even in the early hours of the morning. Buses revved their engines, spewing black smoke into the air, while conductors shouted destinations at the top of their lungs. Lagos, Lagos, Oshodi, enter with your change, oh! Ngozi clutched her bag tightly to her chest, her eyes wide with apprehension. She had never traveled beyond the local stream, and now she was about to board a bus to a city she only knew from stories. She paid the fare with shaking hands and squeezed into the back seat of an old, battered bus. The seat was torn, exposing the yellow foam beneath, and the air smelt of sweat and dried fish. As the bus jerked forward and rolled out of the village, Ngozi pressed her face against the dirty window. She watched the familiar palm trees and mud houses blur past. Every mile they traveled felt like a layer of skin being peeled away. She was leaving behind the only life she had ever known. The journey was grueling. The bus bounced violently over potholes, tossing passengers around like sacks of rice. A woman beside her held a crying baby, while a man in front argued loudly about politics. Ngozi stayed silent, shrinking into her corner. She was terrified. What if Lagos was worse? What if she starved there? She had no family, no friends, and no skills other than farming and cleaning. But then, she remembered Madam Nkechi's face, the hatred in her eyes when she broke the pot. A cold resolve settled in Ngozi's stomach. The fear of the unknown was heavy, yes, but the fear of returning to that house was far greater. She closed her eyes and prayed, asking God to guide her steps in the strange land ahead. As the bus sped onto the expressway, leaving the green forest behind, Ngozi took a deep breath. There was no turning back now. Lagos hit Ngozi like a physical blow. The noise was deafening, a constant roar of car horns, shouting hawkers, and blaring music. The air was thick with exhaust fumes and the smell of roasting corn. Buildings stretched up toward the sky, taller than any tree in her village, and people swarmed the streets like ants. Everyone rushing, everyone angry. The bus dropped her at Oshodi under bridge. Ngozi stepped out, clutching her bag, and was immediately jostled by the crowd. A young man bumped into her and shouted, "Waka Jeje now, look where you are going," before disappearing into the throng. Ngozi stood frozen, overwhelmed by the sheer scale of the city. It was nothing like the quiet village she had left. Here, it seemed like survival of the fittest. Night fell quickly, and with it came a new kind of fear. She had no way to go. She wandered until her legs ached, finally finding a spot in front of a locked shop where other homeless people were laying out cardboard sheets. She sat on her bag, pulling her knees to her chest. She couldn't sleep. She had to watch her belongings. The first few days were a blur of hunger and confusion. She washed plates at a local boka just to get a plate of rice. The work was hard and dirty, and the owner was loud, but nobody beat her. Nobody called her a curse. She slept in uncompleted buildings, waking up before the owners arrived. It was a hard life, brutal and unforgiving, but for the first time, Ngozi felt a strange sense of ownership over her life. This suffering was hers to manage, not a punishment forced upon her. She was hungry, yes, but she was free. One scorching afternoon, Ngozi was hawking sachets of pure water in the relentless Lagos traffic. Her skin had darkened from the sun and her clothes were worn, but her spirit remained unbroken. She ran between cars, shouting, "Pure water! Call pure water!" hoping to make enough sales for dinner. She approached a sleek car with a woman sitting in the back. The woman rolled down the window to buy water. As Ngozi handed over the sachet, the woman looked at her, really looked at her.
She saw beyond the dirty clothes and the tired face. She saw the intelligence in Ngozi's eyes and the polite manner in which she spoke. "What is your name?" the woman asked. Her voice was soft, unlike the harsh shout Ngozi was used to. "Ngozi ma," she replied, wiping sweat from her brow. The woman introduced herself as Madam Adeleke. She owned a large fabric shop in Balogun Market. "You speak good English," Madam Adeleke noted. "You are too young and too bright to be running in traffic. Do you want to work?" Ngozi could hardly believe her ears. She nodded vigorously. "Yes, ma, I would do anything." Madam Adeleke took a chance on her. She gave Ngozi a job as a shop assistant, cleaning the store and arranging heavy bales of lace and Ankara. Madam Adeleke was strict, but fair. She gave Ngozi a small room at the back of the shop to sleep in and paid her a decent wage. For the first time in her life, Ngozi was treated with dignity. She wasn't a slave, she was an employee. She soaked up everything Madam Adeleke taught her about business, fabrics, and customers. It was the beginning of a new chapter, a seed of hope planted in fertile soil. 5 years is a long time in a city like Lagos. It is enough time to break a person or to remake them completely. For Ngozi, it was a time of transformation. The frightened village girl who had stepped off the bus at Oshodi was gone. In her place stood a confident, beautiful woman. Ngozi had saved every kobo she earned. She learned how to sew from Madam Adeleke's tailors during her break times. She had a natural talent for design. She could look at a piece of fabric and instantly know what style would suit it best. Madam Adeleke encouraged her, eventually helping her set up her own small fashion house. Now, Ngozi had her own shop in Surulere. It wasn't huge, but it was hers. The sign above the door read, "Ngozi Stitches." She had 3 apprentices working under her. She lived in a clean, rented apartment with electricity and running water, luxuries she once thought were only for kings. She wore nice clothes that she made herself, and her skin glowed with health.
Yet, despite her success, the shadows of the past lingered. Sometimes, in the quiet of the night, she would wake up sweating, hearing Madam Nkechi's voice screaming at her. She had not contacted anyone from the village. She told herself she didn't care about them. She was a city woman now. She had risen from the dust, and she swore she would never let anyone drag her back down into the dirt. But deep down, a part of her remained a wounded child, waiting for an apology that she knew would never come. It was a busy Tuesday morning at Ngozi's Stitches. The hum of sewing machines filled the air as Ngozi measured a client for a wedding dress. The bell above the door chimed, signaling a new customer. Ngozi turned with a professional smile. "Welcome, how can we help?" The words died in her throat. Standing in the doorway was a man looking dusty and out of place in the polished shop. It was Uncle Chidi, a neighbor from her village. He looked older, his hair graying, holding a worn-out cap in his hands. He squinted at her, uncertainty written in his face. "Ngozi, is that you?" he asked, his voice thick with the village dialect. Ngozi stiffened. Her first instinct was to run, to deny who she was. "Uncle Chidi," she said slowly, "what are you doing here?" He sighed heavily, twisting the cap in his hands. "I have been looking for you for months. Someone said they saw you here." He paused, looking down at his sandals. "It is your mother, Madam Nkechi." Ngozi felt a cold chill run down her spine. "What about her?" she asked sharply. "She is dying, Ngozi," Chidi said quietly. "A strange sickness has eaten her flesh. She has been on her bed for months. The neighbors, we tried to help, but you know how she is. She drove everyone away with her insults. Now she is alone, rotting in that big house." He looked into Ngozi's eyes. "She calls your name, Ngozi. Every night in her fever, she screams for you. She says she cannot die until she sees you." Ngozi gripped the measuring tape until her knuckles turned white. The woman who had made her life a living hell now wanted her presence. It felt like a cruel joke. The news of Madam Nkechi's illness threw Ngozi's life into turmoil. For days, she couldn't focus on her work. She would snap at her apprentices and sew crooked lines. The anger she thought she had buried rose up like vomit in her throat. Why should I go back? She argued with herself as she paced around her living room. She treated me like a dog. She starved me. She beat me. If I go back, she wins. She remembered the scars on her back, the night spent sleeping in the rain. She remembered the broken pot and the hunger. Let her suffer, a dark voice whispered in her mind. It is her karma. God is punishing her for what she did to you. But Ngozi was not a cruel person. She was a woman of faith, and she remembered the teachings of the Bible. Honor your father and mother. The conflict tore her apart. Could she really leave a woman to die alone in her own filth, no matter how wicked she had been? Was she becoming like Nkechi by harboring such hate? She couldn't sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the old woman alone in the dark house. Finally, on the third night, Ngozi fell to her knees and prayed. She asked for strength, not to forget, but to do what was right. She realized that going back wasn't about saving Nkechi, it was about saving her own humanity. She would not let the past turn her into a monster. By the time the sun rose, her bag was packed. Ngozi drove her small Toyota Camry down the bumpy road leading to Umuaya. The journey that had once taken a whole day by bus now took only a few hours, but it felt like traveling back in time. As she entered the village, people stopped to stare at the shiny car. They didn't recognize the woman behind the wheel behind dark sunglasses. She turned the car towards her family compound. Her heart sunk at the sight of it. The large compound which Nkechi used to force her to sweep until it was spotless was now a jungle. Weeds grew waist high, choking the walkway. The roof of the main house was sagging and the paint was peeling off the walls like dead skin. The place smelt of abandonment and decay. Ngozi stepped out of the car, her heels sinking slightly into the soft earth. She took off her sunglasses. A few neighbors had gathered by the gate, whispering and pointing. Is that not the slave girl who ran away? Look at her now. She looks like a governor's wife, another exclaimed. Ngozi ignored them. She took a deep breath, filling her lungs with the village air, a mixture of wood smoke and red dust. She pushed open the front door. It creaked loudly, a mournful sound that echoed in the silence. The house was dark and smelled of sickness and stale air. Ngozi covered her nose with a handkerchief as she approached the bamboo bed in the corner. Lying there was a skeleton covered in skin. Madam Nkechi, the woman whose towering height and booming voice used to make the ground shake, was reduced to nothing. Her cheekbones protruded sharply, her eyes were sunken into deep sockets, and her hair was matted and grey. She looked fragile, like a dry leaf that would crumble if touched. Ngozi felt a lump in her throat. Not of fear, but of pity. This is the monster, she thought. This broken thing? Nkechi stirred, sensing a presence. She slowly opened her eyes. They were cloudy and yellow. She squinted, trying to focus on the figure standing in the light. Ngozi, is that you?
Who is there? She risped, her voice a dry whisper. It is me, Ngozi, she replied softly. Nkechi froze. She tried to lift her head, but she was too weak. She stared at Ngozi, her eyes widening as she took in the expensive clothes, the healthy skin, the aura of success. Tears instantly welled up in the old woman's eyes and spilled over, tracking lines through the dirt on her face. Ngozi, she sobbed, the name breaking in her throat. She didn't yell, she didn't reach for a stick. She began to weep, a sound of deep, guttural regret. She reached out a shaking, bony hand toward Ngozi. You came back. After everything, you came back? Ngozi didn't take the hand immediately. She stood there, watching the tears flow, feeling the power dynamic shift forever. The slave was now the savior. Ngozi fetched water and helped Nkechi drink. The old woman drank greedily, coughing as the water soothed her dry throat. After a while, Nkechi seemed to gather a strange burst of energy. She gripped Ngozi's wrist with surprising strength. Sit down, Nkechi whispered. I have something to say. I cannot face God until I tell you.
Ngozi sat on the edge of the bed, her heart pounding. What is it, Mama? Nkechi looked away, staring at the cracked wall. You are not my daughter, she said. The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ngozi stopped breathing for a second. What do you mean? Your father, my husband, Nkechi began, her voice trembling with the pain of an old wound. He betrayed me. We were married for 10 years without a child. Then he met a woman in the city, a mistress. She got pregnant. She died giving birth to you. Your father brought you home, begging me to accept you. He died of a fever just 3 weeks later. I was left with a child that was not mine. A child that reminded me every day that my husband loved another woman. Nkechi began to cry harder. Every time I looked at your face, I saw her. I saw his betrayal. I didn't hate you, Ngozi. I hated the pain you represented. I wanted to punish him, so I punished you. I made you a slave in your father's house because my heart was poisoned with jealousy. Ngozi sat in stunned silence. The room spun around her. All the beatings, the starvation, the cruelty, it wasn't because she was clumsy or stupid. It was because she was the innocent evidence of a broken marriage. Ngozi walked out of the room and sat on the front porch steps. Her mind was racing. She was not Madam Nkechi's daughter. In a strange way, it was a relief. It explained the disconnect, the lack of love, but it also brought a wave of sadness. She was an orphan, truly alone in the world. She thought about Nkechi's story. She imagined a young Nkechi, heartbroken and barren, forced to raise the child of her husband's mistress. She imagined the shame Nkechi must have felt in the village, the whispers of the neighbors. It didn't excuse the abuse. Nothing could excuse that. But for the first time, Ngozi understood it. She wasn't a monster, Ngozi realized. She was a woman driven mad by grief and jealousy. Ngozi looked at her own hands. She had built a life of love and creativity in Lagos. She had moved on. Nkechi had stayed here, rotting in her bitterness until it literally consumed her flesh. Ngozi realized she was the lucky one. She had escaped. Nkechi had been in a prison of her own making for 20 years. The anger that had fueled Ngozi for so long began to drain away, replaced by a profound sense of pity. Hate is a heavy burden to carry, and Ngozi was tired of carrying it. She stood up, dusted off her skirt, and made a choice. She would not be the daughter of betrayal anymore. She would be a daughter of grace. Ngozi returned to the room. Nkechi was watching the door with terrified eyes, expecting Ngozi to leave, to abandon her just as everyone else had. Instead, Ngozi rolled up her sleeves. Where are the clean sheets? She asked. Over the next 2 weeks, Ngozi became the nurse Nkechi didn't deserve. She hired people to clear the weeds in the compound. She scrubbed the floors until the house smelled fresh again. She went to the market and bought fresh fish and vegetables, cooking the pepper soup that Nkechi used to love, but hadn't eaten in years. She bathed the old woman's frail body, cleaning the sores with gentle hands. It was an act of supreme will. Every time she touched Nkechi, she remembered the beatings, but she pushed the memory away with prayer. Nkechi cried almost every day. Why are you doing this? She would ask, weeping. I was a devil to you. Because I am not you, Ngozi would answer softly. And because God says we must forgive. One evening, as Ngozi was feeding her pap, Nkechi grabbed her hand and kissed it. Forgive me, my child. Please say you forgive me. Ngozi looked into the dying woman's eyes. She saw true repentance. I forgive you, Mama. And she felt a physical weight lift from her own chest. I forgive you completely.
3 days after Ngozi's declaration of forgiveness, the end came. It was a peaceful afternoon. The rain was falling gently on the zinc roof, creating a soothing rhythm. Madam Nkechi had been sleeping more and more. Ngozi was sitting by the bedside reading a fashion magazine when she noticed the breathing change. It became shallow, then paused. Nkechi opened her eyes one last time. The yellow cloudiness seemed to have cleared a little. She looked at Ngozi, and for the first time in her life, she smiled. It was a weak, crooked smile, but it was genuine. Thank you, she whispered, and then she was gone. Ngozi didn't wail or throw herself on the ground. She closed Nkechi's eyes and sat in the silence for a long time. She felt a profound sense of peace. The boogeyman was dead, the secret was out, the cycle of pain was broken. Ngozi organized a decent burial for her stepmother. The villagers were shocked by her generosity, whispering about her big heart. After the funeral, Ngozi locked the family house. She would not sell it. She would renovate it and give it to the church to use as a home for orphans. And she got into her car to head back to Lagos. She looked in the rearview mirror. The house grew smaller and smaller until it disappeared. Ngozi turned up the radio and drove toward the city, toward her shop, toward her future. She was no longer a slave, nor a victim. She was Ngozi, a woman who had walked through fire and come out as gold.
Subscribe and stay tuned for more interesting stories that drop on this channel every day.